Welcome to Icon, everyone. My name's Dan, and I'm a pastor here. And I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning for week 2 of our series called Chapter 2. And really, this series kind of jumped off of Easter a couple of weeks ago. You see, what we talked about at Easter is we talked about this idea of resurrection, of Jesus' new life, and kind of the implications of that for us. You see, we believe that if we put our trust in Jesus, essentially what we get to say to our lives is we get to look at our life wherever we're at, whatever we've experienced, and say, this isn't how my story's going to end. That when we're at the darkest and deepest of places, we get to look at life and say, there's going to be another chapter of my life. I believe in resurrection in my life too. And what we're talking about in the series that comes after that is just, what does that look like? What does it look like for people who put their trust in Jesus to experience that? What is that next chapter of life to look at? And week 2, what we're going to be talking about is this idea that, honestly, what I believe is probably the most powerful idea if we really buy into it in our lived experience as followers of Jesus. There's a lot of important things, but I think the possibility of what I'm talking about today to make an impact on your life could make a larger impact on your life than almost anything else. It is hugely important. It is of paramount importance. And I was thinking about how to clearly communicate this and maybe an approach to take to talk about this subject. I had an idea. So what we're going to be calling today and what we're going to be talking about is this idea of tribes. Tribes. This is something that we've all experienced. You see, there's all different kinds of tribes in the world. And here's what I mean by this. Have you ever shown up someplace, maybe for the first time? Maybe you're at a dinner party or at a work event for, a coworker or a spouse of yours, and you don't really know anyone. And you're trying to mingle, you're trying to kind of meet people, and you don't know anyone there, and all you're thinking is like, when is this thing over? And you're kind of, maybe you experience that like walking around in the lobby, and you're like, I don't know anyone, right? And then you bump into someone. And you try to start a conversation, you kind of do the awkward thing like you know you do, and you go, so, how about the weather, right? And you're like fighting for something of like commonality to talk about, right? And then they mention, maybe for you, maybe they mention this 67 Chevy that they're restoring. And your eyes light up and you think, this is my person, right? And because you love cars and you start geeking out and talking about carburetors and stuff. Like, I don't know what you talk about. Right? Clearly, I'm not much of a car guy, right? And you just know, like, I'm going to hang with this person for the rest of the night. They're part of my tribe, right? They get me. I get them. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you're a little bit more like me, and you open the hood of a car, and you look in, and you go, yep, that's an engine, right? That's about as far as it gets. Maybe for you're talking to someone, you're trying to find commonality, and then they mention about watching last week's episode of Game of Thrones, and you think, yes, oh my gosh, and you start geeking out, and you're like, oh, I was on pins and needles, and you think like, they're a part of my tribe, they get me, right? Like, I love this. You see, there's all different kinds of tribes. There's different music tribes, and people geek out over one musician or another, and you're like, oh, I like their older stuff, before they were mainstream. And there's like all different kinds of tribes. There are like political tribes that you love a certain politician, or, there's religious tribes, and there's, homeschooling tribes and public school tribes and car tribes and music tribes and movie tribes. There are all different kinds of tribes in this world, and we've all experienced this. How one point of commonality can bring you near to someone. You see, the definition, what a tribe is all a tribe is it's a social group that exists for a common purpose. It can be for community or friendship, strength, protection, belonging. And that's what a tribe is. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is this idea of tribes, this idea of, a social group with a common purpose. And humanity has been grouping themselves into tribes for millennia. If you go back to the very first kind of cultures that existed, there were these hunter-gatherer tribes that would work together for some of these very purposes. As communities began to grow and they started, trying to take down large prey, you would need a larger tribe. In fact, the Hebrew Scriptures speaks about Israel that was a combination of 12 different tribes. You see, this has been around forever. In fact, it was those Hebrew people that spoke to the importance of this kind of community, this sense of belonging that should exist in the world. In fact, their very earliest writings, as they kind of wrote their creation narrative, they spoke to this. You see, they talked about God creating everything. And these early Hebrews, they believed that as God created, it was good. And God created this, and it was good. And God created that, and it was good. And God created this, and it was good. And it was all good until it wasn't. Until there was one thing that God looked at and said, ooh, yeah, that's not good. We read this in Genesis 2. It says, and the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. God is looking about at all these good things, and then he sees man in isolation, man alone, and he says, it is not good. See, theologians for generations have been saying this is a broader statement than just someone should find a spouse. No, it's much bigger and broader than that. This is saying that it is not good for humanity to live in isolation away from people. And we know this to be true. The science proves this out. In fact, there are forms of punishment where you separate someone, in a sense, from their tribe. You isolate them from human contact. The most severe punishment, one of the most severe punishments is this very thing. It's separating them. The worst criminals and the worst prisons in the world, they're separated from humanity. They say you can't be among the general population. You have to be isolated. Right? And we found out, in fact, there's different societies and groups and different movements that have spoken out against this and say that actually prolonged solitary confinement like that is actually psychological trauma. It's a form of torture. That scientists have found out and psychologists have found out that prolonged absence from human connection can actually increase depression, feelings of isolation. We've seen this in the sciences. We know this to be true. God is speaking about a truth here. It is not good for man to be alone. It's why here at Icon, one of our core values, one thing you might hear us say from time to time is we believe that life is better when you live it together. That life is just a better lived life when you live in community. And come on, you know this to be true, right? You've experienced this. Maybe when you were growing up, you had friends that you were just thick as thieves, right? And you were always together and you loved that. And then maybe you moved away and you lost that. You moved into a new school. You started at a new job. You entered a new career. Then you didn't have that kind of relationship. Life just lost some of its vibrancy, didn't it? Because we know this to be true, that just life is just better when we live it together. This is just a universal fact that we know to be true. And it's one thing that we try to do here at the church. We try to increase relationships. We want to be friendly. But the thing is, just being friendly isn't enough, is it? Like, we're not just looking for friendly people. It's great to be friendly. Listen, as a church, I hope we are friendly. I hope when you came in, someone greeted you and waved. I hope someone shook your hand and said, man, it's great to see you. We're glad you're here. But friendly isn't what we're going for. Because we can get friendly other places, right? You can experience friendly people when you walk into Walmart, right? You can experience that with your favorite barista at your favorite coffee shop, right? If you love Starbucks, any huge Starbucks fan? Any Starbucks fans in the house? All right, so a few of you, yeah, right? Or maybe for you, maybe it's Summer Moon. Maybe you love Summer Moon. All right, calm down. We've got an assistant manager and a few employees at Summer Moon, right? You've had your moment to shine, all right? So here's the deal. You find whatever your favorite coffee shop is, your barista should be friendly. Because they want your money, right? They want your tip, right? But if you go up to your favorite barista and you're like, oh my gosh, it's been so long, and you just start like downloading on them, and they're like, oh, and then my mom said this, and then they're like, thank you, the latte's down there, right? Like, the friendly, we can get that anywhere. But I love the way Rick Warren puts it. He's a pastor of Saddleback Church in California. He says this: people are not looking for a friendly church, they're looking for friends, right? You're not just looking for friendly people. What we want is we want true, genuine friends. That's what we want. People that'll stick with us through thick and thin. That's what we're looking for. That's what the heart's longing for. Not just friendly people, but true, genuine friends. But here's the deal. In this day and age, it's challenging. It's hard because all of us experience this. Do you know what I know probably about most of your lives? You are probably busy, right? Like so many people I talk to, how's it going? Oh, good, but busy. So busy. right? Because there's so many things happening in our lives. I know for me, sometimes I feel like a part-time pastor, a part-time husband and father, and like a full-time chauffeur to my 4 kids, right? Like that is my life. Right? I've got 4 kids and none of them can drive legally, right? But sometimes you just got to figure it out, right? And here's the deal. It's a challenge because I've got one kid that, they've got games on Mondays and Fridays and then practices on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then another kid that has lessons on Mondays. And then the 2 older ones have youth on Wednesdays. And then my youngest girl, she also has Girl Scouts on Wednesday. And that's just a handful just to keep up with, right? And then on top of that, you're supposed to have a life. Then there's church meetings and other things going on. And life is busy. I know it's not just true of me. It's true of all of us. So in a world where life is busy and life can be all-consuming, and we know we need deep, true friendships, it begs this question, how do I find and cultivate relationships like that? Right? The ones that go below the surface. The ones that are more than just friendly, but are true, genuine friends. How do we find that? And then how do we cultivate that? How do we grow those relationships? What does that look like? And here's the deal. Everyone's different, right? Everyone has a different personality. Everyone has a different temperament. And some people, it's easier for you to meet people, to connect with people initially. For me, I'm an extrovert. Any other extroverts in the house? How many of you guys are extroverts? You are, okay, so a good number of you. I know the extroverts because they'll actually put their hands up, right? So you extroverts, you're like me. It's easier for you to meet people. You can go talk to people and shake people's hands and introduce yourself, and that's not a problem. What's a challenge for many extroverts, what's a challenge for me is sometimes to take that below the surface. Sometimes I can have a million friendships that are about this deep and not very many that go real deep. So the challenge for me and for many extroverts is to learn to go below the surface, right? And then there's other people in this room. Some of you guys in this room, you're like my wife. My wife is an introvert. And I'd ask the introverts to raise their hands, but they just glare at me, right? Because introverts aren't wanting to raise their hands anyway. I already know who the introverts are in this room. Because you know how I know? Because when Arlene was up here and she said, greet someone around you, it was the introverts that were look away, look away, look away. You were making a mad dash for the bathroom. That's your least favorite part of service. I know because you've complained to me. And I know I'm not paying attention, right? So introverts, I understand it's more challenging to meet people. It's more challenging to be in big groups of people. Man, sometimes you can turn it on. I talked to a few people that they're like, man, I can do that. I can meet and greet and I can turn it on and introduce myself. But then that sucks the life out of me, right? Then I need to go home and hide from humanity, right? And I understand this because that's my wife. That's how Kelly's wired up. She's an introvert. And I've learned the motto of introverts. If you don't know this, introverts have this life motto, and here's the motto of introverts. Introverts unite. We are here, we are uncomfortable, and we want to go home, right? That is the motto of the introvert, right? It's I'm here, I'm fine, it's a little awkward, I'm getting uncomfortable, and I'm ready to leave, right? So I understand everyone's wired differently. So when you're wired in different ways, how do you cultivate and build those relationships? How do you build those friendships that it's more than just being friendly, but they have your back? And you have their back. How do you build that kind of relationship, that kind of friendship? See, that's what we're talking about today. And I'd like to make kind of a bold statement. Something that maybe at face value, if you grew up in the church, if you've been a part of the church for a while, you might hear this and you might push back. You might think, Dan, I don't know. I don't know if I buy that, but I want you to follow me just for a moment. Here's what I'm talking about. I believe that the church, at its best, exists to create and nurture relationships. The church, at its best, actually exists to create and nurture relationships. I might sit here and you might see that and you might think, Dan, I don't know, you don't have the Bible in that statement right there, right? And then there's something about singing songs. I think singing songs are pretty important, and you stand up there and talk, that's not really, at its best, it exists to create and to nurture relationships. Dan, I just don't know if I can buy it. And if that's you, that's fine. In fact, I encourage you to push back like that. But I want to spend the next few moments explaining what I mean. I want to show you what I mean by me believing the church at its best exists to create and nurture relationships. And here's the deal. To do this, I'm going to have to do something that I talked about last week, that we did last week, that I said we don't do very often. And now I've done it like 2 weeks in a row. I promise this is an anomaly. But I need to give you like a crash course. I need to teach you another couple of Greek words. If you were here last week, we talked about another Greek word. We're going to talk about 2 Greek words. Now, here's the deal. I'm not that bright. I can just Google stuff, right? So I may pronounce these words wrong. And the other thing is, last week, if you were here last week, anybody was here last week, here's the deal. I said third service is super smart. So they'll understand this Greek word. The other 2 services are they're not real bright. They're kind of dumb. They're a little slow on the uptake. I said first service was like romper room. I'm not lying, right? So they're a little slow. But then I had people that were in like multiple services, and they accused me of like telling that same joke every service and making fun of the other services. And I am offended at that accusation. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm offended, right? So anyway, like I'm not going to say any of that this service. I'm just going to say you guys are super smart. You've got this. So I'm going to teach you a Greek word. Are you all ready for this? Okay, here we go. So the word I'm going to talk about, and this will talk about why I believe the church at its best exists to create and nurture relationships. The reason I believe that is for this word right here. Ekklesia. Everybody say ekklesia. You see, way smarter than first service. Okay, so ekklesia, this is the Greek word originally used to talk about the early church. When the early church would talk about this Jesus movement, they would use this word ekklesia. And what ekklesia means is ekklesia is a gathering of people. It's an assembly or a congregation. So we gathering here, we are the ekklesia. So when the early church would talk about this Jesus movement going out and making a difference, they would say the ekklesia of Jesus. And this gathering, this community, this congregation of people. But something happened when the Bible was being translated from Greek into English. Is they would translate it in kind of a more ancient, or kind of, for them it wasn't ancient, it was modern, but kind of a form of English. And then that form of English got outdated, so then they kind of retranslated a little bit. And in one of those first translations, they came across this word ekklesia. And the word they used to translate this was actually informed by a German word. It's kind of a derivative of this original German word, and the German word is Kirche. Everybody say Kirche. Kirche, yeah. And what Kirche means house of the Lord. Now, this is a small but important distinction. So as the translators went through and they got to the Greek word ekklesia, they created this word Kirche. And Kirche sounds a whole lot like church. Church comes from this original word Kirche. So what we understand as church, I want to ask you, is it more informed by the word ekklesia or more informed of the word Kirche? When you think about church, be honest. How do you think about church? When you talk about church, how do you talk about church? Is it more reflective of a people, a congregation, a gathering, or is it more reflective of a place, of a gathering location? Think about words you may hear when people talk about church. I went to church. Look at that church. I don't like that church. Or I stopped going to church. How are we talking about it? We're talking about it like it's a location, like it's a place, like it's a physical thing. And that's not what Jesus originally talked about. You see, what the church is supposed to be, what the church really is, the ekklesia of Jesus is a people. It's you. It's me. It's flesh and it's blood. It's relationship. That is the ekklesia of Jesus. That's what it's about. You see, and in fact, somebody actually caught this early on. In the 16th century, there was a Bible translator by the name of William Tyndale. And what he decided to do, what people were doing is they were creating new translations based off of older translations. So they'd have a translation that was already in English, kind of like an old English, and then someone would translate that kind of into a modern English, and then so on. And this guy, William Tyndale, he said, I want to go back to the original Greek manuscripts, and I want to translate those to our modern vernacular. And as he went back, he was reading through, and he came to the word ekklesia. And he saw that the modern translators used the word church based off of Kirche. And he said, wait a minute, those are two different things. This first century church, these early followers of Jesus were actually talking about a people. So he translated ekklesia as congregation. And as Jesus said that even the gates of hell would not prevail against my church, William Tyndale wrote, even the gates of hell would not prevail against my congregation, against my people. See, this is a different concept. And you might think that people applauded William Tyndale and said, man, good catch on that one. That helps us. No. In fact, the exact opposite happened. When the power structures and religious authorities found out what William Tyndale was doing in his translations, they had all of his Bibles burned. They had William Tyndale arrested. They had William Tyndale tortured, strangled, and burned at the stake, calling him a heretic. You see, this is what happens to when the power structures find out that someone's reading their scriptures differently, is they have to revolt against that because they had a dog in the race. And they thought if people begin to understand church as a people, as a movement, as a gathering of people, we'll lose authority in these structures that we have, so we have to shut down that dissenting voice. Some interesting little church history for you. Makes you have a good Sunday morning, right, to think about. You see, this is what we're getting at. This is the power and the importance. And I'm not trying to argue that we need to change our Bibles. And when you come to church, like cross it out and write Ekklesia. I'm not saying that. But we have to understand the importance of this. It's for this very reason. This is why I make this statement. That I believe the church at its best exists to create and nurture relationships. Because the church at its core is relational. It's relationship. You see, the church isn't a building. Icon is not these lights and this stage and the carpet and the chairs you sit on. Icon is you. It's every single one of you. Take a moment, like for real, and look around this room. Look at the different people sitting across this room. You see, that is the church. That is the body of Jesus. That is the Ekklesia I'm talking about. And it's amazing complexity and diversity and differing opinions and differing wirings and differing, like all of that is the church. See, if all the church was a building, then listen, I would not give my life to like keeping lights on and like, putting a TV on the stage. That's not worth it. But when it's you, when it's people, this is what the church is. It's that Ekklesia of Jesus. You see, and I would argue, I believe that actually the primary activity of the early church was building and nurturing relationships. This is what they did. This is what the church was about. If you read after the Gospels, after the life and death of Jesus, if you read what happened in the church, all it is like all these letters, right? And they're writing around about how to serve people and how to love people. And what do you do when there's conflict? What do you do when there's two different types of people, two different classes of people? What do you do when people believe different things in the same body of people? What do you do with that? And the whole rest of the New Testament that we have is about learning how to build and cultivate and nurture relationships. I love the way Andy Stanley, he's a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. I love the way he puts it. He says that the job of the early church, he says the church's job was one anothering one another. It was to figure out what that looks like. How you one another one another. And here's what he means by this, because countless times in the New Testament, there's these references to how to care for one another and what to do towards one another. Here's just a snapshot of a few of them. The church's job is to forgive one another, accept one another, care for one another, encourage one another, submit to one another, bear with one another, restore one another, carry one another's burdens, and to love one another. What if the church was most known for that? For how to best one another. What if we were a community of people that took that seriously? That became our primary mission, is to do that, because that was what the early church did. That's what it looks like to be the Ekklesia of Jesus. That's what it looks like to carry this mission forward, not just to show up once a week, not to come to 400 Old Post Road because you're going to go to church. No, you live every single day because you are the church. And you find ways to serve and to love your community. You find ways to support one another, to be true, genuine friends, to lift each other up in all your differences. You find ways to love and to accept one another. See, this is what we're talking about. This is the big idea of what I'm talking about today. This is why I believe that it's the best thing the church can do. See, this is why we're talking about this idea. Think about the context of where we started. Because what we're talking about is we're talking about tribes. A tribe is a social group that exists for a common purpose. This can be for community and friendship, strength, protection, belonging. That is what the church is supposed to be. That is what the church is supposed to do. It's supposed to be this tribe that exists for one another. And here's the deal. Here's the reality. Like, this is how it breaks down in real life. Because here's the deal. Today, for 3 services, we probably had between 450 and 500 plus people show up. How do you create community with a group like that? Right? Like, you third service crowd, you may never see the people in first service. So how do you create community there? With so many different people showing up from different places, from all over the place, like, how do you do that? So for us, how we answer this question, for us, how we create those kinds of opportunities for relationships to exist is through something we call small groups. It's a really clever name. It's like groups that are small, right? That's why we call it small groups. We break this room down. We realize it can never happen like this. But how it can happen is when we break into smaller groups that meet all across the city, all across San Marcos and Kyle and Wimberley and Luling and Buda and all over the place. And we have these groups that get together all on different nights because everyone's schedule is different. There's different kinds of groups for different types of people. We have middle school groups and high school groups and young adult groups and adult groups and single groups. And there are all kinds of different groups that exist to serve the needs of this place. And unapologetically, like, I'll be honest, I've got an agenda today. I have a goal today. And that is for every one of you to give small groups a chance. To jump into a small group, because this is where you experience one another. You see, for me, I don't experience the mission of Jesus by showing up here and that's it. See, my life has been more impacted by my small groups than a Sunday morning service ever has been. And I'm the guy that talks most of the time on Sunday morning. See, it's not here that I experience my burdens being carried. It's in my small group. See, even Kelly and I, we're in a small group because we believe in this. We're bought in. And my small group, I love my small group. There's been times that we've gotten together and talked about job changes and how that would affect families and, if that person moved and what that would be like. And we help them wrestle and pray through that. We've, as a small group, has sat on a porch outside. I'll never forget talking about loss of a loved one and someone in our small group and how to process that grief and what to do with that pain. See, that is what small group is for. That is what it's about. See, and I want to encourage you to experience that. In fact, if all you're doing is just kind of showing up here on Sundays, right, and you just kind of show up, you listen to the thing, you sing the music, you listen to the person talk, and then you leave, you're missing it. Listen, if you're just showing up and coming to the Kirke, you're not fully experiencing Jesus' Ekklesia. If you're just showing up, say, I'll come to Kirke. I'll come to 400 Old Post Road. I'll kind of check the box. I'll spend an hour of my week there and I'm good. Then you're missing the power of the Ekklesia of Jesus, because that can only happen in relationship. You're missing out on so much of the power. So I want to encourage you. I want to encourage every single person. Would you consider joining a small group? Just give it a try. Give it a shot. Just once, just twice. If you want more information, I want to encourage you. You can go to iconchurch.com/groups. And here you can find out more about the groups. You can click a link and it'll take you to joining a small group, or you can click a link and talk about starting a small group. There are groups, like I said, that meet all over the place. But here's the deal. Here's what happens every time we talk about small groups. Every time we end up talking about small groups, someone comes to us and says, listen, I looked for a small group that fit my needs, that met on the right night or in the right place, or, the right kind of demographic of people. And there's just not a group for me. And I guarantee if every person that showed up today requested information about a small group, first of all, we would be thrilled. Then we would be terrified, because that's a lot of work. And then we'd have to be telling people there's not a group perfect for you. But for those people, I want to challenge you. What if you started a group? What if you said, listen, I don't know a ton about the Bible. I don't know a ton about a lot of stuff, but I can be friendly. And I can take it beyond that. That can be my starting point. I can learn to be someone's true friend. Can I love someone? I can do that. Can I accept people? I can do that. Can you have conversation with people? Okay, I can do that. Then you can lead a small group. What if you created that space for someone else? If you're out there and there isn't a group for you, then there's probably more people like you. So your job, you can create that space for someone else. So I want to encourage you, whether you're joining a group or creating a group, you can go to that website and find out more information. You can also stop by the info center on your way out here and they can get you more information. And if you want to start a small group, I'd encourage you to talk to our small group director. Her name's Tiffany Portis. She'll be out there at the info center. Stop her, talk to her about starting a small group. My greatest joy would be if everyone here said, listen, I'm done doing life alone. I've got a lot of friends, but I don't have a whole lot of those deep relationships. People are actively learning to love and accept me and care for me. And I'm doing that for other people, and I want that. Here's how we're going to close. We're going to close kind of doing something that we talked about last week. See, last week we talked about baptisms. And what baptism is it's just this public declaration of an inward decision. It's people that have decided, I want to follow Jesus, and they've never gotten baptized, or maybe it's been years, or maybe they're a child when they got baptized, but it wasn't this personal decision they made. It's people saying, I want my family, I want my friends, I want my community, I want my Ekklesia to know about this decision I've made to follow Jesus. So in a moment, we're going to do that. In a moment, I'm going to pray. The band is going to play one final song. And set up over here, we've got a baptismal tank over there. No, that's not a hot tub because it's pretty cold water. Sorry, guys. And we're going to baptize some people. And here's what I'd ask. I know it's getting late, and I know you got to go grab lunch. I know you got to get out of here. But would you consider just sticking around just for a few moments? In the previous two services, we've baptized so many people. This service, I think we only have a few. So would you stick around and celebrate with these people? Because how we do baptisms here at Icon is we like to party. Because we believe this is a celebration. That these people are declaring, I have new life in Jesus. I'm putting my trust in him. And I want the world to know about this decision. So what I'd ask is that you stick around with your family. You stick around with your Ekklesia and you celebrate. Listen, they've invited friends and family here. They want to celebrate with you. Could you stick around if you want to? You can squeeze over here. You can do whatever. Again, we're relationships here. This is family. So especially if you brought someone or came with someone, know someone, you want to get some pictures, feel free to come over here. You're all welcome to kind of move around and come over here if you want. And we're just going to celebrate. So as they come up out of the water, could you cheer them on? On the screen, their name will be up there. A little blurb about why they're getting baptized will be up there. And let's celebrate this decision together as a church family. Amen? Man, let's pray.